Hello, my sweet friends. It is so nice to be back from my Davecation. That's right, it is I, Dave Makes Noises, and today we want to know what is the absolute dumbest backstory you've ever heard from a character. Part 1. The most ridiculous backstory I came across is from a Gloomstalker Conclave ranger named Delilah. Apparently, Delilah had this nice hobby of taking night poops in the woods in the dead of night, calling it a peaceful and serene experience. But when she kept getting nearly mauled by panthers every time she went out at night, she was all like, well, I guess I better learn magic that lets me take my night poops in peace, which leads her to take a 2-year-long journey to find a Gloomstalker Conclave and teach her their ways. Fellow DM missed a session and asked if I would stand in for him, knowing I knew Curse of Strahd inside out. While filling in for him, a player asks to have a sidebar where he goes over his backstory that the DM hadn't touched on, and he was wondering if it might be relevant given where they currently are. He explains how his character is a god from another material plane, and he's just traveling the planes masquerading as a mortal for fun. More than that, he created the material plane he was from and is more powerful than any other deity. He wanted to display his godly powers by just straight up destroying the vestiges in the Ember Temple. I told him I wasn't really comfortable handling such a situation as just the substitute DM. He was surprisingly cool with that. It was a weird session. I put out an ad for a game looking for 4 level 1 players, only official sources allowed. A guy applied with a level 20 homebrew race. He was literally Bahamut, that could change any dice roll to a natural 20 at will, then gave me a 20-page backstory that was basically, he was involved in every major event in history, and a final paragraph about how his character is guarding over the other PCs, so it should make perfect sense why a level 20 PC is traveling with a bunch of level 1s, so I have to accept him. I'm a multi-class paladin / warlock, and I play my god and patron against one another because I'm smarter than both of them. I had a sorcerer who got kicked by a donkey, flew into the air, and then threw a Feywild portal in a tree. Abdul Thundercock the Minotaur was born fully grown, immediately obliterating his mother. Grief-stricken, he now searches the world to find out why his birth was so odd. I had a cleric who became a war cleric by accident because she had a habit of talking to the stars at night, and one night Mars spoke back. Okay, from a homebrew superhero RPG intended to be absurd, one of the characters had been struck by lightning while watching a Godzilla movie, and had all the powers of Godzilla, but it was a crappy little 12-inch black and white TV, so his Godzilla form was 1 foot tall. My very good friend, who was a smartass and thinks he is clever, but I can read him like an open book, did essentially this. His expected free bonuses will be in the brackets. Super renowned pirate, expected free intimidation or fear in enemies, got screwed over by a curse and lost all of it, owned his own legendary ship and crew in the past, expected to have an unbeatable legendary magical ship once backstory finished, secretly died, but his sheer will brought him back to get his stolen shit back, either expected to be a revenant or a straight-up self-resurrection. And as usual, my question to this is, okay, and all of this as a level 1 rogue? You're insane. Girl lost her favorite toothbrush. As she was looking for it, she also lost her glasses. Feeling around blindly, she picked up what she thought was her toothbrush. It was actually a lute, so she became a bard. That's my favorite one. Hexblade, whose weapon had a long, convoluted backstory about how many generations it's been passed down and how many dragons, gods, and other powerful creatures it had killed. The actual character who would be using the sword was basically, I don't know. I had a player take the pirate background and say he was a land pirate. His dad was a pirate and he was raised to be one, but refused to go out on the water and became an adventurer. I think he had an open water phobia. I trolled one DM by writing, for a level 1 character, about 4 pages of amazing heroic exploits. Dragons slain, maidens rescue, treasures looted. And then the last paragraph was basically, my character is that dude's brother and is real sick of his mom asking why he can't be a hero like his brother. I once DM'd for a new group of first-time players, all of which came up with pretty straightforward backstories except for one. They elected to make a dragonborn cleric named Humpa Thumpa, named after their favorite things, humping and thumping, who was raised by snakes and believed they were a snake until they got surprised by an attractive woman and stood up, realizing they had legs the entire time. They then became a cleric of thighs, who dedicated themselves to worshipping thighs. No idea how these totally incongruent things were supposed to work together or what the hell they were thinking. They didn't make it past session 0. I have my own gothic horror setting I created a few years back. After giving them all the info about it, all of the players turned up with something on brand. A blood hunter lycanthrope, a righteous cleric looking to tip the scales on the side of good, a mad scientist artificer searching for the key to reanimations, and this one dude literally turned up with a cowboy who was plunged through a wormhole and is now not only in the wrong dimension, but the wrong time as well, and is trying to quantum leap his way back. I've had a couple of surprise one-shots before and have, as a result, had some very silly backstories. My absolute favorite, though, is Mistress Small. Mistress Small was a normal halfling arcane trickster, but she eventually discovered a teacher who was willing to teach her the ancient art of rune scribes. She got all the way to Rogue 5 Rune Scribe 5 before she was betrayed by her former teacher. Now paranoid that she'd become a better scribe than he was, he used an ancient pact to strip her of her knowledge and power, the equivalent of losing 5 levels, but she happened to lose the 5 levels of rogue she had, leaving her as a pure rune scribe who still met the requirements to take the class, because she was level 5. The one shot was completely insane, and she was just the icing on the proverbial cake, but it's still the dumbest backstory I've seen in a game thus far. Character who was the god of war. Naturally, as the god of war, he enjoyed fighting. But because he was a god, it also made fighting completely boring, being both immortal and super OP. So he hatched a plan to remove his power and make himself mortal, essentially turning himself into an average human so he could experience the thrill of combat again. Actually made for a pretty fun character. When the cleric communed with his god, the ex-god of war would jump in and join the conversation because he was friends with both of them. This is actually the backstory for a character of mine. Tortle, from a pacifist tribe in the swamp, stubs his toe one day and flies into a rage, becoming a barbarian. Is exiled until his anger issues are dealt with. Decided to head to Baldur's Gate for anger management therapy, but ended up in hell. I've forgotten some of the details, but in a superhero game, a friend of mine's character was at a NASCAR race and something happened, the part I forgot, and all the people in the crowd were magically fused into one super redneck. He also had an adamantium chainsaw on a chain. Mine is a rogue who used to be a farmer. His stats are sub 60 with a 14 in dex. The backstory was that one drunken day when his farm had a bad harvest, he stumbled and fell on his head. When he woke up, he had no memory of being a farmer and thought he was a super spy that the bard was talking about. Now, he is in search of the command center to learn his next mission. Somehow, he is still alive with 18 health at level 5. Not dumb, but weirdest and most amusing, Cabbage, the garden gnome. He was a gardener who tended the town's hedges, but kept getting attacked by roving monsters. He learned to fight them off with his giant shears and eventually swore an oath of the ancients and became a paladin. Looked every bit the stereotypical garden gnome, with long white beard and red cap. This ended up being weirdly appropriate, since the party's first mission was to stop a bunch of blights attacking a town. Edit, forgot the best part. His catchphrase was, "Snip, snip, motherfuckers!" I cannot even remember all the details, because this story was so pointlessly convoluted that it was almost a parody, except the player took it seriously. Character was a multi-class paladin hexblade. She originated in our real world, in Cuba, during the mid-1700s, so knew and used flintlock pistols. Pistols did not exist in this campaign world, so she had to convince the DM that she could craft ammo somehow. She originally operated in Cuba as a pirate who was also a devout Christian minister? She was somehow cursed and sent to our campaign's D&D world where Christianity doesn't exist, so she was angry at Christianity failing her and railed against the false promise of Christ because he never existed in this world. Also, she was somehow connected to the D&D campaign world's versions of Romani. Somehow, even though she was transported to an alternate universe, she still had this connection. Also, she was the aunt of one of the other players' characters, who was not from real-world Cuba. I cannot remember how this made sense. And there was further backstory of her niece growing up abused by her parents. Some of this is creative and could be interesting, but there was far, far more to this confusing backstory, and the thing is, no one in D&D world knew about Christ or Christianity, so it had no bearing on the world. TLDR, an overly detailed, convoluted backstory that tied in pointlessly with another player character. None of us could keep track of what was going on between them, but both players would roleplay these weird stories between each other. It's not a real horror story, but it was just very odd, and we scratched our heads about it more than a few times. I guess I've mostly played with people who use much more sensible backstories. I appreciate interesting backstories, but I firmly believe at a first session, or session 0, that the story should be summed up by a few sentences, and that every person at the table should be able to get it and nod their heads. You can always add more details later, but start off with an elevator pitch that people can process. Salutations, my sweet spring chickens, and thank you for hanging in there until the very end of this video. If you've got a dumb backstory you'd like to share with the community, please feel free to do so in the comments section of this video. If you've got another story you'd like to share with us, please join us over on our official subreddit, r/MrRipper, where we source most of the stories for videos just like this one. If you're a DM or a player and you're looking for a group to play with, we have a lovely Discord server with your name on it, well, Ripper's name on it, that was purpose-built to help you find a group of friends to start playing D&D with. I hope this week that you try to take a step back, breathe mindfully, and then step back in. Thank you again for watching. I'm Dave Makes Noises. You can find me in places doing stuff. Please sub for Nat 20s. Ding that dong for a buff to your charisma. We love you here at Rip Daddy's house, and we'll see you next time.